Hello, I'm Phil Crozier. I'm the brand ambassador for Wines of Argentina for Europe. I want to talk to you a little bit about what makes warm climate and cool climate wines different, and it's possible to have both in Argentina. We have to remember a few things about Argentina which makes it very unique. The first is that the vast majority of the wine is made in the Andes Mountains. You can see down here that we have all these regions from north to south or south to north, depending on which way you're looking. And the other thing is that we don't just go from north to south, we go from east to west. And as we're going from east to west, we're going up in altitude. So there is a general rule of thumb here, is for every 150 meters we move up the mountain, we lose about 1 degree Celsius in altitude. So if we take the example of Mendoza, which is the most well-known region in Argentina, we go from around 400 meters to the extreme of the east of Mendoza up to 2,000 meters, which is very high up into the Andes Mountains. But that means we've got a very vast array of temperatures that we're dealing with, and that's going to have a big impact on the way the vine behaves when it's producing the fruit. The other thing to remember is that also as you go higher in altitude, we're losing temperature, so the cooling influence is clearly the fact that we're in the mountains and we have altitude. But we also have an increase in ultraviolet light, and that increase in ultraviolet light has a profound effect on the grapes themselves and the vine, the way they're producing the grapes. And so as we go from north to south, we're actually getting cooler. So we have a combination of altitude as being a cooling influence, but also latitude. So if we go way down south to places like Chubut, where it's really not possible to produce Malbec because it's not warm enough, we go to the limit here, which is Neuquén and the Rio Negro in the northern part of Patagonia, and then we go all the way up to Salta and Jujuy in the north, where we have vineyards that, well, are the world's highest vineyards. Most of the world's highest vineyards are in these regions. Why? Well, because as we're going north, we're going towards the Tropic of Capricorn and then all the way onto the equator. We're getting warmer. So as we're getting warmer, the need to go higher is increased. So if you look at it like a kind of 3D map, we go from the north, where we have the highest vineyards in the world, and then we go right down to the south here to a place like Chubut. In the far south of Chubut, we have the most southern vineyards in the world. So it's easy to see that Argentina really is a country of extremes. So we're going to taste some wines that are being provided by Taste Argentina, our friends at Taste Argentina, which is the only all Argentine dedicated online wine shop in the UK, so give it a try. And tasteargentina.com. They have a fantastic array of wines, and I'm going to taste 4 wines with you, 2 Bonadas and 2 Malbecs, one from warmer climate and one from cooler climate. Now all the wines that we're going to taste today are from Mendoza, so we've got that in common, all from Mendoza. 70% of all the production of Argentine wine comes from Mendoza. It's a big province, it's a little bit bigger than Wales if you were to go there, and we have altitudes that range from 400 meters in the extreme east to 2,000 meters high in the northern part of Mendoza, a place called Uspallata, which is the highest vineyard area in all of Mendoza. So we're going to try first Bonarda. Now there's a lot of people, for many years when I was writing wine lists, it was said that this grape variety came from Piedmont in Italy, where there is a grape variety of the same name called Bonarda, and so for many years we took that as being the case, in particular view of the fact that a large number of people from Italy came between around 1870 and onwards to Argentina to start again after the whole phylloxera epidemic that wiped out most of the vineyards in Europe from 1862. So many of them came to Mendoza, So it was generally regarded that it was this. Well, we now know that this is not the case. We have a new science called ampelography that looks like the genetic code of these vines. And we find that Buonarda is not in fact Buonarda from Italy. It is a French grape called Corbeau that originated from the Savoie. It's related, but it is not the same grape. So this has become Argentina's second most grown grape variety, after Malbec, of course. And it is very much part of the Argentine uniqueness in terms of the grape varieties, the very many grape varieties that are grown in Argentina. So the first one we're going to try is from Zuccardi. Zuccardi, a very well-known family-owned winery in Mendoza, very successful. This is really one of their signature varietals. They've become a little bit of a specialist in this grape variety. And they own vineyards in Maipú, which is to the east of Mendoza, and also in a place called Santa Rosa, which is really to the extreme east. We're at about 500 meters above sea level here, where we have pretty warm vineyards. Now, if you're in the east and if you're lower down, because you don't have so much of an altitude, then the temperature is going to be pretty warm here. And that's perfectly suited to Buonarda, because it needs a long time to ripen. Because one of the features of Buonarda, if and when you look at the website and maybe order some, is the fact that the tannins are extremely soft, so it needs a long time to ripen them, and normally they're amongst the last grapes that are harvested in Argentina. So let's try this. This is from Santa Rosa in the east, so the altitude is not very high, so we'd expect that this is going to be pretty warm as a place. I've been there myself. It is pretty warm. This is called Siria, and you can see from the colour we have a very deep dark red colour that is very much the signature colour of Buonarda. And Zuccardi have a lot of vineyards here. They have a lot where they grow the warmer climate varietals. They grow some Malbec, but they grow principally Buonarda. Most of the Buonarda in Argentina, there are over 14,000 hectares of Buonarda, are to the east. That's really, and there's a lot of very old Buonarda as well, sort of vines that are between 80 and 100 years old. So there's a long tradition of making wines here. So, very kind of slightly jammy, not very jammy, but it's a varietal that does show a little bit of jamminess. Sort of black fruits, squishy cherries. One of the things about warm climate as well is that you don't have so much high acidity in the grapes here, and there's a reason for that, and the reason is that in warmer temperatures the sugars are produced faster in the grape. We don't have so much of, some of that acidity is burnt up because the vine is a little bit stressed. And also we have very soft tannins when we have warmer temperatures as well. Soft tannins because all the molecules on the skin sort of join together, a process called polymerization. And when they're removed from the skin during the winemaking, they stay soft and they stay polymerized. So you can drink these wines young, where they're very fresh and very juicy style. So there's a little bit of spice on here as well. Also partly because it's from a warm area, and warm areas, Syrah likes a warm area, and that's a spicy varietal. Yeah, and that's exactly what you get from this. It's soft, it's opulent, it's very well balanced as a wine. There's nice acidity in it too, but the overall impression that you get in the mouth is these lovely, juicy, soft tannins. Makes it very easy drinking, go well with food, but you can drink it on its own as well. So from around 500 meters above sea level we go higher, and so we're going west into the mountains, and we're going to try a Buonarda from the same winery, since this is very much a signature grape for them. Got the same winemaker making the wine, so the only difference here really is where the grapes are from. Now these grapes are from a place called San Pablo. San Pablo is in the Uco Valley. The Uco Valley is where all the trendy kids hang out in the south of Mendoza. It's It's often thought to be a very new region. This is not the case. It's a region that is about 100 years old for winemaking, but it has seen a big resurgence in the last few years because we are higher in the mountains here. We're about 1,400 meters above sea level, so we've got 1,000 meters. So that means that we've got a large temperature difference, but we also have an increase in the ultraviolet light. For every 1,000 meters you go up, you gain about 12% of ultraviolet light. So what does that do? Well, the vine is an amazing thing. It's got a way of dealing with all sorts of conditions that find it a bit tough, and vines kind of like to find conditions a little bit tough. Not too tough, but they like a bit of stress. And so in response, of course, the most important thing that the vine is producing is the seed, and it's the grape which is the vehicle for the seed to be eaten by an animal or a bird, travel through its gut and then proliferate the species. That's nature. So in order to protect the seed from ultraviolet light, which is damaging to the DNA of the seed, it produces a thicker skin. And it also produces more of something that we call anthocyanin. Now, anthocyanin is the colour molecule which bonds to the tannin molecule in the skin cells on the outside of the skin. So they don't quite so easily do it here because it's cooler. So what you're going to find with the tannins here is they're not so loose and rich and juicy, is they're a little tighter. So you're going to feel the tannins a little bit more in the mouth. We also get very high aromatic profiles from cooler regions, and that's because the acidity in the grape is preserved more because we have a much slower ripening, we've got much cooler temperatures, and once the vine goes down below 15 degrees, which it always does at night because we've got big differences between day and night, then the acid is preserved. And also part of the grape is something called primary aroma, which is just underneath the skin, which produces much of the character of the grape variety, and they're also preserved. So we tend to find that we have higher aromatics, higher acidity. The tannins may be a little bit tighter. There are parts of the Uco Valley where it's quite difficult to ripen those tannins, and some parts perhaps a little bit more suited to producing white grapes where the tannins in the skins are less important than red grapes. But we're kind of not at the limit, but we are pretty cool here. We've got 7 or 8 degrees difference between the Zuccardi Syria and the Emma Zuccardi that we've just seen, which is a line of Bornadas that they produce from very cool climate sites, one of which they have in San Pablo. So we're about 1,400 meters in the Uco Valley. Now the Uco Valley is split into 3 distinct areas. When you come into the Uco Valley from Luján de Cuyo, the traditional area of Mendoza, about an hour and a half's drive, you come into a place called Tupungato, which is the northernmost part. And then you go to the middle part, which is called Tunuyán, and then to the south to an area called San Carlos. It's a big valley. And within these 3 main regions, we have lots and lots of sub-regions. And San Pablo is in the middle part, which is Tunuyán, which is separated from Tupungato by a river called Las Tunas, and separated from San Carlos in the south by a river called the Tunuyán River. So rivers dominate here. Of course, we're in the foothills of the Andes. We still have water coming down from the melting snow in the Andes, but we're very close to the Andes here as well. Another cooling influence that we have. So, cold temperatures. So what's this wine going to be like? Well, it is very aromatic. We've got some violets, a bit of lavender on the nose, and that's very kind of typical of high altitude red wines that we get from Argentina. But also it feels very fresh, and that's because we have higher acidity. And we tend to smell the tannins a little more as well. They're not so ripe. So sometimes you can get a little bit of greenness on the nose, which I think gives the wine tremendous energy. Oh yes, so in the mouth. The warm climate coats the whole mouth. It's like sucking on a piece of chocolate. You've got those lovely soft tannins, sticky tannins around the mouth. Here, the tannins and the feel of the wine, the texture of the wine is much more in the middle of the palate. We get less on the outside here, much more concentrated towards the middle. We call that very direct. The wine it's like an arrow shooting from your mouth. It has tension as well, so the tannins they're not all glooby and globby and round your mouth. They really do have a little bit of firmness on there as well, and when you have that also, it means that high acidity, those little bit of firm tannins, the wines are pretty age-worthy too. So if you buy this wine and you don't want to drink it straight away, buy yourself a case, put it away for a little while in your cellar, and it will reward you, although it's still delicious young. So you can see also that we've got a little bit more of that purple colour as well that we tend to get from these high altitudes. And I always equate these purple colours with the aromas that you get from the wine. As I mentioned before, we've got this violets and lavender. Sometimes you get roses and these very aromatic profile that you get from high altitude. You know, it's quite unusual to find this grape in the high parts of Mendoza, because these areas are very highly regarded, and they're going to be planting grape varieties where perhaps they're going to have a little bit more appeal. But to plant Bonarda up here, I think is a very brave thing to do, and you should try it because it really is absolutely delicious from these cooler parts, even though traditionally it's mostly grown in the east, the more warmer parts. I think it's a really nice, it shows that it can ripen here. We've got enough sun. We've got between 320 days of sun a year. So lots and lots of sun, lots of ultraviolet light, lots of colour, lots of acidity, lots of aroma, and that lovely tightness and that energy that you feel on the palate. If you've never tried Bonarda, give it a try, because I think it's a very versatile grape. You know, people are now making very light kind of swimming pool style wines by using a process called carbonic maceration, which is quite interesting. You get these lovely juicy, light, easy drinking, lazy Sunday by the pool wines. And then you've got some pretty serious wines like this Emma Zuccardi here, which, you know, you have a lot of concentration. They're proper food wines, but obviously you can drink it on its own as well, but they're very good food wines. It's a very versatile grape, and it's delicious. You know, when I was walking a restaurant floor, I would often sell a Bonarda to someone who said they don't like red wine, and it was always a great way of saying, well, perhaps it's the tannins you don't like. If you want something that's really juicy, you're not going to feel so much the tannins, maybe a Bonarda is the way to go, and more times than not it worked. So let's move on now. Let's go to Malbec. Of course, we've got a great selection of Malbecs at Taste Argentina. So let's taste a couple sort of warmer versus cooler climates. So we're going to start with Luigi Bosca DOC. DOC denotes that it has an appellation. You know, the first appellation in the Americas was a place called Luján de Cuyo in Mendoza in 1994. It's a geographical appellation, as are all the appellations in Argentina, but this one's a bit different because not only is it geographical, to put DOC on the label, there are certain laws that you've got to stick to. The vines must be more than 50 years old, which is quite easy in Luján de Cuyo because you've got a lot of old vines there. No more than 7,000 kilos of grapes per hectare, so pretty low yields, and it must spend at least a year in oak. And there are a number of wineries back in the 90s that signed up to this, and you're quite, if you go to Argentina or you see some of the wines online available in the UK, they will say DOC. So it's kind of like a quality thing. And Luigi Bosca are one of the most famous wineries in all of Argentina. Again, another family-owned wineries, which is very much a feature of Argentina. Some of these families have been going a long time, some of them are much newer. So Luigi Bosca, owned by the Arizu family, originally a Spanish family that came at the end of the 19th century to Argentina, and Luigi Bosca is by far and away their most famous brand. So these grapes are from Luján de Cuyo, a place called Vistalba, which is to the west. So you've guessed it, it's going to be a little bit higher in altitude. We're at about 1,070 meters above sea level here, and these are old vines, 80-year-old vines that the fruit comes from. But it is a little warmer than the Ucuvali. Why is this? Well, it's because there is a little mountain range called the Precordillera between the main Andes, which is the big, beautiful floating ice cream in the sky pictures that you see of Mendoza, and this little mountain range that's in the way. So that protects Luján de Cuyo to some extent from all the weather that's coming down from the Andes. So it's a little warmer here. So, you know, the altitude, it's pretty flat. The altitude in Luján de Cuyo ranges from around 950 meters to 1,100 meters. So there's not much difference in terms of altitude, and it's a pretty big place. You know, it's the kind of Hollywood of Malbec, if you like. It's where Malbec was first planted, it's where it became famous, and if you were drinking Malbecs 20 years ago from Argentina in the UK, most of them came from here. It's a beautiful old area. It's like stepping back in time, and some beautiful old vineyards here that I feel that really need to be preserved, because this is the history of Argentina. So this is the Luigi Bosca DOC Malbec from Vistalba in Luján de Cuyo, which is around 1,070 meters above sea level. And they're a slightly more traditional winery, Luigi Bosca. You know, they're a very famous brand. They are one of the most famous brands in all of Argentina. They're pretty well known in the UK too. You get a slightly more leathery character here. You know, this is more kind of what you might expect from, for example, a Bordeaux. But you have these lovely aromatics. Again, you have these very pronounced violets from here. This is what I particularly get from Vistalba, actually. Lots and lots of violets on the nose. And it's quite opulent on the nose. There's a little bit of spice as well, a little bit of white pepper. Beautifully soft in the mouth, actually like a velvet curtain soft. It's really deep, and it's dark, and it's opulent, quite bohemian actually in the way it is. And I think that's one of the things that people love about Malbec. You know, if you want something that's a little bit more old school and opulent, rich, very sort of self-indulgent style, then look no further than this wine, because it really delivers in spades. And I think, you know, I remember selling Malbec 20 years ago when people started really waking up to Argentina and waking up to Malbec. That's really what people loved about it, this beautiful opulence, this enveloping, almost comfort blanket that you get from drinking Malbecs like these. Beautiful. And then we're going to go to cooler regions. We're going to go to Zuccardi again. They have invested heavily in vineyards in the Ucuvali in the last few years. They built a beautiful winery in a place called Paraque Altamira in the south, made of concrete. It's become very famous now. They are really moving towards these kind of cooler climate areas. They still have their tradition in the east, which is great. That's their name. But they've been investing here, and Sebastian, who's the son, who's the kind of new generation winemaker, is really spearheading the charge towards these cooler climate styles. Now, the grapes from this came from two places. One called Vista Flores, a fairly old vineyard that they've owned in Vista Flores for a number of years. Very traditional sort of pergola style. The water is fed not by drip irrigation as most other places in the Ucuvali are, but by flood irrigation. So it's a very traditional vineyard. There used to be a lot of very traditional vineyards in the Ucuvali. And it's a little warmer, so we're at about 1,050 meters above sea level, very stony soils, and you tend to get lots of violets, roses, lavender here, but the wines can be quite big and chunky from Vista Flores as well. And this is tempered with some fruit from Paraque Altamira, which is where the most of their investment went to the south. It has its own geographical indication now. It's become famous as a site, it's pretty much full up with vineyards now. You can't buy land there. It's become a kind of crew as an area. And again, this is where all the cool kids are hanging out. So here we have chalk. This is the defining factor. It's the only place in Argentina that was given its own IG based on its soil profile. So there's a lot of research that went into this, and it's the chalk that makes the difference. This was once the bed of the Tunajan River, which kind of over millions of years meandered and then left deposits of calcium carbonates from higher up in the Andes over millions of years. So you get these big boulders that are covered in chalk, and it's in the soil. And so this really does have a big impact, particularly on the texture of the wine. So we've got a kind of warm and a little and a bit of cool climate fruit in here as well. So this is called Q. It's one of their most famous brands. It's all from the Uco Valley. It's made in concrete, as all their wines are made in these sort of concrete vessels that they have. It's become very trendy to go back to fermenting in concrete. Stainless steel, which was the rage for a while, is not really what people are using so much anymore, but they're now building sort of these clay vessels, concrete eggs, concrete. It's a much more natural material to use when you're doing your fermentation, and this is where they spend their money. There's some oak, and what is really typical from Argentina at the moment is how people use the oak. It's not so much of this new oak. Apart from anything, if you're paying in pesos, oak is very expensive. If it's coming from France or the United States, which the vast majority of it is, it becomes very expensive. And we get that phenolic ripeness in the grapes, that joining up of the molecules, that polymerization, almost as a given in Argentina. So we really don't need to worry about aging the wine in oak for a long time. If you are going to put it in oak, generally it's been used already. So we're going to have less impact from that oak. Nothing wrong with oak. A little bit of oak is great. But Malbec's very sensitive to oak. So if you use a lot of oak, then sometimes it dominates the fruit. And of course, for me, that's what makes Malbec magic, is the purity of the fruit that you get from here. And if you want to show the place, it makes much more sense to use less oak, because that oak is going to mask all the characteristics that you get from the place. So this is very much a trend with particularly the younger winemakers in Argentina, where they search for more purity. They're using more organic, sustainable methods of agriculture, which is very easy in Argentina. We don't get the problems that are inherited by having high humidity in the vineyards. We've got low humidity. Remember, I said at the beginning, we're in a desert, so we get much less incidence of disease. We don't really need to use pesticides because there are no pests to speak of. Up here in the Andes, it's hostile to them. So most of everything that they produce is organically produced. Not everybody labels it that way, but it's much easier to do that here. So again, we get this more aromatic profile on the nose. It's a little leaner. It's a little bit more austere than the Luigi Bosca. You have to search for it a little bit more. You feel that it's very fresh on the nose. We'll even get some citrus notes. We get this chalkiness as well. It's difficult to describe, but minerality kind of comes in lots of forms. I think it's a little bit inky in the way it smells, and you do smell a sort of slightly metallic edge, which I really like in wines. I like to smell the soil. I like to smell the minerality. It's very pure. It's pure as a driven snow, actually. It's very direct. It tells you where it's from straight away. One of the things that young winemakers today are doing is they're picking a little bit earlier as well. They're not picking when it's fully ripe, totally ripe. If you pick grapes that are totally ripe, almost raisined, you lose the terroir. So by picking much earlier, about a month earlier than they were 10, 15 years ago, then you tend to get more of the vibrancy, and you tend to get more of the character of the place. And this is where Argentina is going. So cool climate then. So we're at 1,050 meters in Vista Flores and 1,050 meters down in Paraje Altamira in San Carlos, where we have all that chalk, which is going to have an effect on the way the wine feels in the mouth. Yes, much more tight, slightly greener. You feel this totally on the tongue. You don't get any of this kind of softness and ripeness around the edge of the palate. It's very direct. The acidity is much higher. It's like squeezing a lemon over a bowl of black cherries. It's a much more fresh approach. And what's interesting is that just because the fruit is not really ripe, it doesn't mean to say you're not going to get ripe fruit character. You do get some ripe sort of Morello black cherry in this. You get this very immediate vibrancy. I think the chalk gives the wine a huge amount of energy. Lots of winemakers are not de-stemming, taking the stem away from the maceration process between the juice and the skins. Lots of them are using some of those stalks to give a little bit of greenness, a little bit of energy to the wine, and this is very energetic. So you really feel this in this wine. Much more gastronomic, I think. This is a wine that's going to go very well with food. Acid in wine always cuts through protein. So this is a very gastronomic wine. I think there's a lovely purity of fruit that goes through this. Really pure. A little bit of tension too. Not as tense as some of the wines from some of the rock and roll winemakers, but tense enough and vibrant, full of energy, full of purity of fruit, absolutely delicious. So it's almost the opposite of the last wine that we tried. So warm climate versus cool climate. What are you going to like? If you tend to like the more tighter, leaner styles of wine, when you're going into restaurants or if you're going onto websites to pick your wine, check that it's from a cool climate. If you like a more opulent, rich, round, soft, bohemian style of wine, then go to a warmer place where the tannins are much softer, they're bigger, they're rounder. Each one has its own time and place. I'm not saying one or the other. They both have their place, but this is where we start learning a little bit more about the regional differences in Argentina, which is, I think, what makes Argentina what it is. It's not just Malbec. I was at a conference a few years ago where there was a very famous winemaker called Alberto Antonini, who said a little bit less Malbec, a little bit more Argentina. And what he was saying was, don't do less Malbec, produce fantastic Malbec, but produce Malbec that really reflects the place where it's from. And this is the way of Argentina, and this is where you're going to see much more of the labelling in the future. So anyway, go onto the site, have a pick around. I'm sure you won't be disappointed, and thanks for listening.